Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe. Chapter 1. I Go to Sea. I was born in 1632 in the city of York to a very good family. I had 2 older brothers. One brother was killed in the war against the Spanish. The other disappeared, and we never heard from him again. At a very early age, I wished to travel and see the world. My father did not want me to go. Tears ran down his face as he begged me to stay in York and become a lawyer. He had lost his other sons to adventures, and he did not want to lose me. He said that God would punish me if I did this foolish thing. One day I went down to the docks to watch the ships. A friend was sailing his father's ship to London, and I decided to get on that ship. On September 1651, I went on board that ship without telling my parents. This is when my troubles began. Soon after the ship left the docks, the wind began to blow, and a storm struck our ship. I was sick and terrified. I knew my father was right, and I had done a foolish thing. I prayed to God to let me live, and I promised to go home to my father. But at night the weather cleared, and the next morning I watched the sun rise over the sea. I thought it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. My friend came to me. "Well, Bob," he said, "how are you after that little bit of wind?" "Little bit of wind? That was a terrible storm," I replied. He laughed. "That was nothing," he said. "Let's go make some punch." We went and got drunk, and I forgot my promise to God. A few days later the wind began to blow again. This time it was a very terrible storm. We dropped both anchors, and the cables ran out to their ends. Huge mountains of water rose in front of us and crashed over the ship. We watched other ships blow past us. Some blew out to sea. Experienced sailors were terrified and amazed at the power of the storm. At night, the boatswain begged the captain to cut the masts. The captain allowed it, and both masts were cut down. The captain prayed softly, "Lord, be merciful to us, or we are lost." In the middle of the night, one of the sailors cried out that the ship was leaking. All the sailors ran to pump the water out of the ship. Another ship close by us fired their guns for help. I was so terrified that I fainted. A long time later, I woke up and went to help pump water, but the water was filling the ship. The captain fired the ship's guns for help until another ship sent a boat to rescue us. Finally, we were all in the little boat. 15 minutes later, our ship sank. My heart was dead with horror. The men rowed hard toward shore, but it was many hours before we stepped onto dry land. We walked to the town of Yarmouth, where people were very kind to us. They gave us food and good rooms and money to return home. I should have gone home to my father then. When the captain learned that this was my first voyage, he was very concerned and serious. "Young man," he said, "you should understand this as an omen. You should not go to sea. Heaven gave you a taste of what will happen to you if you continue to go to sea." He begged me to go back to my father. "Young man," he said, "if you do not go back to your father, you will find only disasters and disappointments." Chapter 2. I am captured by pirates. I parted from my friend and went to London by land. I knew I should go home, but I was ashamed to face everyone in my town. Soon I went on board a ship to Africa. I made a mistake when I did not sail as a common sailor. I would have learned how a ship works. Because I always made the worst decisions, I did not sail as a sailor, but as a gentleman passenger. I had money in my pocket and fine clothes on my back, so I did not have to work on the ship, and I did not learn anything. I took the voyage after becoming friends with the captain. He was an honest man and gave me good advice. He told me to buy £40 worth of toys and trinkets and take them to Africa. He told me I could resell them in Africa and make a lot of money. This voyage was my only success. I returned to London with almost £300. I was now a trader. I decided to make the voyage to Africa again. Unfortunately, my friend, the captain, died in London. So I left £200 with his widow and boarded a ship sailed by his first mate. This was the most unhappy voyage I ever made. As our ship sailed towards the Canary Islands, we were chased by Turkish pirates. We raised all our canvas sails, but still the pirates gained on us. We knew we must fight, and we prepared our 12 guns. At 3 in the afternoon, the pirate ship caught up to us, and we fired our guns at him. They had 18 guns, and we only had 12, but none of our men were killed. Then they turned the ship around and prepared to attack us again. This time 60 pirates jumped onto the decks of our ship. We fought hard, but, to make a sad story short, 3 of our men were killed, our ship was damaged, and we became prisoners. I became the slave of the pirate captain. I was very miserable when I remembered my father's words. Heaven had punished me, but this was only a small taste of the misery I experienced later. For 2 years I was the slave of the pirate captain. During that time I planned my escape. One day my master went fishing. He took me and another young slave to row the boat. While we were out in the boat, a fog blew over the water, and we could not see the shore. We rowed all day and all night, but we were lost. In the morning we discovered that we were very far out at sea. After many dangerous hours we arrived safely on the shore, but we were tired and very hungry. After this disaster, my master ordered his carpenter to build a little cabin in the middle of a longboat. This cabin had room to lie down, a little table, and some cabinets for food and drinks. He also added a place to steer and sail. My master took this boat out fishing many times. Because I am very good at catching fish, he always took me. One day he decided to have a boat party for his friends. He ordered the slaves to load the boat with supplies. He also ordered us to load the boat with guns because his friends planned to do some hunting. But that evening my master came on board alone. He said the guests were very busy and the boat party was cancelled. Instead, he was having a feast at his house. He ordered me to go out in the boat and catch some fish for them. My master sent one of his family members to supervise me and the young slave. He said I should catch some fish and then bring the boat to his house. Chapter 3. I escape from the pirates. This was my chance to escape. I loaded the boat with supplies for my journey. Ismail was the name of my master's family member, but we called him Mowley. I knew I would have to trick him. "Mowley," I said, "my master's guns are on the ship. Can you get us some gunpowder and bullets? We can shoot some birds for our dinner." "Yes, I can get some," said Mowley, and he bought some gunpowder and bullets. The boat was loaded with all the supplies I needed, and so we sailed out of the port to catch some fish for my master's feast. When we had sailed far away from the port, I went quietly behind Mowley and pushed him into the sea. He begged me not to leave him and swam after the boat, but I went into the cabin and got a gun and pointed it at him. "You swim very well, and the sea is calm," I told him. "Swim to the shore, and I will not hurt you, but if you come close to the boat, I will shoot you in the head." So he swam to the shore. Then I said to Jury, the slave boy, "Jury, if you will promise to be faithful to me, I will take you with me. But if you will not be faithful to me, I will throw you into the sea." The boy smiled at me and promised. When Moley had swum too far away to see, I turned the boat and sailed south. The wind was strong and the sea was calm, and the boat moved quickly over the water. I sailed for 5 days. On the 5th day, I sailed to the coast and put down my anchor at the mouth of a little river. I did not know what country this was, but we needed fresh water. At night the air was filled with the roars and screams of some terrible animals. We were too frightened to go ashore and waited until daylight. In the morning we saw some strange creatures swimming and splashing at the water's edge. Jury and I were very frightened. One of the creatures swam toward the boat, and I shot at it with my gun. We needed water badly. Jury said he would go ashore with one of our jars and try to find us some water. "But what if wild men come?" I asked. "If wild men come, they will eat me, and you can run away," he said. This made me love him very much. He came back soon with fresh water and a strange animal he had shot. The meat was very good, and we saw no wild men. This country seemed to be the wild land between Morocco and the land of the Negroes. This place was full of tigers, lions, leopards, and other savage animals. We sailed along the shore and did not see anyone. Several times we had to go ashore for fresh water. "Look," said Jury, "a terrible monster." I looked and saw a huge lion sleeping on the shore. "Jury," I said, "you will go kill him." "Me? He will eat me," said Jury. So I picked up my gun and shot the lion. Jury went ashore and took the skin off, and we dried it on the roof of our cabin. We sailed south for 10 days, eating and drinking very little. After 10 days we saw some people on the shore. They were very black and naked. I wanted to talk to them and sail close to land. They ran along the shore to greet me, and we communicated using signs. I made a sign that I was hungry and wanted something to eat. They ran away and soon came back with some meat and grain. I was glad to have something to eat, but I was afraid to go very close to these black people. They seemed to be afraid of me too. They put the food down on the ground and went a long distance away to watch me. Then I went to get the food. I wanted to thank them for the food, and soon I was able to do something for them. 2 strange and terrible animals came running out of the woods. The people seemed very frightened. The animals jumped into the sea, and one of them began to swim toward our boat. I loaded my gun and shot him in the head. He struggled towards shore, but died and sank into the water. It is impossible to explain the fear and surprise of these people at the noise and fire from my gun. Some of them fell down to the ground in terror. But when they saw the animal dead in the water, they came back and helped me drag it out of the water with a rope. It was a strange kind of leopard with a very fine spotted coat. The people wanted to eat the meat, and I made signs that they could keep it. They were very happy and grateful. They gave me a lot of food and water, and also the skin of the leopard. Then I left my new friends and sailed for another 11 days. I sailed to a point of land jutting out into the sea, and I soon decided it was Cape Verde, and the islands in the distance were the Cape Verde Islands. "Master, a ship!" shouted Jury, and I looked and saw a Portuguese ship. I thought it must be a slave ship travelling to Guinea for more slaves, but it was sailing away from the shore. I sailed toward it as fast as I could. They saw me and slowed their ship. 3 hours later I came on board. I told them that I was an Englishman, and I had escaped from slavery from pirates. The sailors were very kind to me, and the captain said he would take me with them to Brazil. The captain said he would buy my boat and Jory. I did not want to sell Jory, but the captain said he would set Jory free in 10 years if the boy became a Christian, so I let the captain have him. Chapter 4. I become a Brazilian farmer. We had a good voyage to Brazil. When we arrived, I sold my lion skin, leopard skin, my guns, and most of my cargo to the captain. He gave me 220 pieces of 8, and with this money I went on shore in Brazil. I became friends with a good, honest man who owned a plantation and sugar house. When I saw how quickly the farmers became rich, I decided to become a farmer too. I bought some land and began farming. For the first 2 years I grew only enough food for myself. The 3rd year I planted tobacco. I wanted to plant sugarcane, but did not have anyone to help me. I wish I had Jory. The life of a farmer was not the life for me. I wish I had not disobeyed my father. I should have stayed at home and lived a life of luxury. The sea captain that rescued me decided to return to London. I told him about the money I'd left with the widow of the old sea captain in London. "Write a letter to this person who has your money, and I will deliver it to her," said the captain. "After she gives me the money, I will buy all the things you need to run a plantation and deliver them to you." I thought this was a good plan, and I wrote a long letter to the widow telling her all my adventures. She gave the money to the captain, and the captain sent me all sorts of farming tools and equipment and a lot of other goods. He also sent a servant to help me. I sold some of the cargo and bought a black slave and a European servant. I had all the things I needed to run a successful plantation. Soon I became a rich tobacco farmer. I should have been content with this comfortable life, but I was greedy. After 4 years of living in Brazil, I was friends with many of the merchants who stopped at the port. I told them many times of my adventures on the coast of Africa. I explained how easy it was to trade toys, knives, even bits of glass, for valuable goods like gold, elephants' teeth, and slaves. The merchants listened with great interest. One night 3 merchants came to me and told me about their secret plan. They planned to sail a ship to Africa, take some natives, and bring them back to Brazil to work on their plantations. They asked me to go with the ship to manage the cargo, and in return they would give me some of the slaves. I agreed to their plan. This was the worst thing I could have done. Chapter 5. I go on board in an unlucky hour. I told the other merchants to take care of my plantation while I was gone. I wrote a will. If I died on my voyage, I left my plantation to the sea captain who saved my life. On September the 1st, 1659, I went on board the ship. This was an unlucky hour. It was the same day that I left my mother and father 8 years ago. We had a terrible voyage. Our ship was damaged by storms, and the wind blew us in the wrong direction. The captain of the ship checked his instrument and discovered that we were near the Caribbean islands of Central America. The wind was still blowing very hard when one of the sailors called, "Land!" and the ship hit sand. We did not know where we were. The waves crashed over the ship, and the ship seemed in danger of breaking up. We lowered a small boat into the water, and 11 of us began rowing towards shore. We did not know if the shore was made of rocks or sand, and we were afraid our little boat would be smashed, but we rowed as hard as we could. A huge wave crashed against our boat, and before we could say, "Oh God!" we all fell into the sea. The waves rolled over my head, and I could not breathe. I tried to swim toward shore, and the waves smashed me against rocks. Finally, the waves washed me up onto dry land. I had no warm clothes, no food, and no weapon but a little knife. But I found some fresh water, and I had a little tobacco. Soon I climbed into a tree and slept. Chapter 6. I acquire many things. When I awoke, the sun was shining and the sea was calm. I saw the ship stuck on some rocks out at sea. I saw that the ship was secure. If we had stayed on the ship, we would have been safe. We all would have been safe, and I would not be alone and miserable. I took off my clothes and swam out to the ship and climbed on board. There was a lot of food and many other useful things on the ship, so I built a raft using some of the wood of the ship and loaded the raft with supplies. On my raft, I paddled back to shore and found the mouth of a little river. My raft almost turned over and I almost lost everything. With a lot of pain and difficulty, I brought the raft up on the shore. I did not know anything about this land I was on, so I took a gun and climbed the nearest hill. At the top of the hill, I saw that I was on an island. I did not see any people or wild beasts, only many strange birds. I killed a big bird, but it was not good to eat. I returned to my raft and built a small hut to sleep in that night. I saw that my raft would not survive another journey, so I swam back to the ship and built another raft, but this one was smaller, lighter, and better than my first raft. I loaded it with more supplies and sailed back to my camp. When I arrived, a little wild cat was sitting on one of the seamen's chests. I fed her a bit of biscuit. She seemed very friendly. Then I built a tent out of the ship's sails and put most of my supplies into it. I lay down with 2 guns beside me and went to sleep. For many days I made voyages out to the ship and brought back as much supplies as I could carry. For many days I made voyages out to the ship and brought back as many supplies as I could carry. I found big chests of bread, boxes of sugar, cables, rope, metal, and many other things. I also found a box full of money. I smiled when I saw the money. "I have no use for you," I said. "You are not worth anything." But I took the money anyway and wrapped it in cloth. While I was on the ship, a storm blew in, so I quickly swam back to shore and got into my tent. When the storm was over, the ship was gone. Chapter 7. I build my fort. I began to think about where I should build my house. I had built my hut on low land near the sea, and I needed a safer and better place. I needed 4 things: fresh water, shelter from the sun, protection from dangerous men or beasts, and a view of the sea so I could watch for ships. I found a hill near the sea with a little flat area near the top and decided to put my tent there. I built a strong fence around the flat area and entered from a ladder that I pulled in with me. I brought all of my food, guns, and supplies inside this fence and built a large, strong tent to sleep under. Then I dug a small cave into the hillside. This cave would be my cellar. I worked many days to complete my fort. Every day I went out with my gun to explore the island and find food. I discovered goats on the island, and one day I shot a female goat. Her little kid followed me home, and I was forced to kill it too. This gave me meat for a long time. I was very depressed about my situation. The storm had blown our ship far away from usual ship routes. I did not expect many ships to come this way. Tears ran down my face when I thought that I might die here alone. One day I was walking with my gun, cursing God for leaving me on this island, but as I thought, I began to realize I was lucky. 11 men were in that boat, but only one survived. Then I thought about all the supplies I had: guns, powder, tools, clothes, bedding, a tent, and many other things. In many ways, I was a very lucky man. It was September the 30th when I washed up on this horrid island. I was worried that I would lose track of time and forget what day it was, so I made a wooden cross and carved on it. I came ashore here September 30th, 1659. I made a calendar by carving notches on the wood. I rescued many other things from the ship that I have not mentioned: pens, ink, paper, some books and 3 Bibles. I also rescued a dog and 2 cats from the ship and brought them with me. The dog stayed with me for many years. With the pen and paper, I began to write down the story of my life. After I made a list of the good and bad things in my life, I felt a little better. When my house was very comfortable and I had everything I needed around me, I sat down and wrote my journal. I wrote until I ran out of ink. Chapter 8. I throw away the grain. One day I found a little bag of grain that I had taken from the ship. I wanted to use the bag to store gunpowder, so I threw out the grain and soon forgot about it. A few months later I noticed some stalks of good English barley growing out of the ground. I was astonished and thanked God for this miracle. Nearby I found rice growing. Then I remembered the bag of grain I had thrown out. I must admit, I stopped thanking God when I realized that my own hands had put the grain there. I carefully collected the seeds to plant next year. On April 16th, I was working on my house when the ground began to shake. I ran out of my cave. It was a terrible earthquake. The whole island was shaking. The sea moved violently. Part of the mountain fell and crashed into the sea. I sat on the ground and cried, "Lord, have mercy on me." Chapter 9. A terrible hurricane. Soon it began to rain. Waves smashed the island and the wind tore trees up by the roots. I crawled into my cave. The cave began to fill up with water, and I had to make a drain. If this island often had earthquakes, I could not live in this cave, I thought. I began to make my house stronger. The hurricane washed the wreck of the ship closer to shore. I discovered that at low tide I could walk out to the wreck. I could not enter the ship, but I realized I could dismantle the ship and use the wood and iron. Soon I began to work. I could only work a few hours per day when the tide was low. When the tide was high, I fished. I caught many fish and dried the meat. Every day I went to the wreck and got a lot of wooden boards and iron. By June, I had enough wood to build a ship, but I did not know how to build a ship. One day I caught a green turtle and made her into a soup. I found many eggs in her and ate them too. Her flesh was the best thing I'd eaten since I came to this horrid place. Chapter 10. I am very sick. On June 18th it rained all day, and I stayed inside. I felt very cold and began shivering. For several days I lay shivering in bed. I could not sleep and had a terrible pain in my head. I prayed to God for the first time since the hurricane. On June 26th I went hunting. I felt very weak, but I killed a female goat and brought her home and ate her. The next day I was so sick I lay in bed and could not eat or drink. I could do nothing but cry, "Lord, pity me. Lord, have mercy on me." When I slept, I had a terrible dream. A man made of iron came down from the black clouds and said, "All these things have not caused you to repent. Now you will die." It is impossible to explain how scared I was. The man raised his spear, and I knew he was going to kill me. When I awoke and discovered it was a dream, I was still terrified. For years I had not thought seriously about God or my own soul. My father taught me well, but 8 years of being a sailor had made me wicked and hard. In all of my adventures I had not thanked God for my good luck, or asked him for advice. I had not considered that God was punishing me by putting me on this island. The growing of the corn and the earthquake had reminded me of God's power for only a few moments, but now that I was sick, I had many hours to think about death. I remembered that my father had said that God would punish me if I disobeyed him and went to sea. Then I cried, "Lord, be my help, I am very sick and frightened." This was my first real prayer in many years. After that I felt better, and got up to make myself something to eat. That night I cooked some turtle eggs in the fire, and this was the first meal when I asked God's blessing in my whole life. Then I walked a short way from my house, and sat and looked at the sea. What is this earth and sea? I thought. Why does it exist? Then I thought, God has made it all, and he guides everything. I began to think of all the bad things I'd done in my life, and I was ashamed and sad. I went home. As I was looking for some tobacco, I found a Bible in one of the trunks. I opened the Bible and read the word, "Call to me in the day of trouble, and I will deliver, and you will give me glory." I thought about these words often in the years I was on the island. Before going to sleep, I sat down on the floor and said a prayer. Then I went to sleep, and I think that I slept all night, all day, and all the next night. Many years later, I learned I had lost a day from my calendar and never knew how. I woke feeling much better. Over the next few days, I slowly recovered. I thank God for my return to good health. The next morning I sat down and began to read the Bible. I began to really pray. I did not pray for God to rescue me from the island. I prayed to be forgiven for my sins. After that, my solitary life was not painful or hard. Chapter 11. I explore the island. For several weeks I read the Bible, prayed to God, and tried to regain my strength. I was still very weak from my sickness. I had been on the island for 10 months. Since I did not think I would be rescued soon, I decided to explore the island a bit more. First I explored the little creek. The water was fresh and good. I found some tobacco growing near the creek. I saw many plants that were strange to me. I did not know if they were useful or if I could eat them. The next day I followed the creek into a forest and found lots of grapes and melons growing. I spent all day picking grapes, and that night I climbed a tree and slept. In the morning I continued exploring. I walked for 4 miles through a valley until I came to a little spring of fresh water. This valley was so green and lush and beautiful that it looked like a garden. I found cocoa trees and orange, lemon and lime trees. I hung some grapes on the trees to dry. I carried some of the fruit home with me. My journey took 3 days. I made several journeys to the valley to gather fruit. The valley was such a beautiful place, I thought about moving my house there. But finally I gave up that idea. Near the sea, I might see a ship and still had hope of being rescued. I did build a small house in the valley, and sometimes I spent nights there. Now I had a country cottage and a house on the sea. Near the beginning of August, I took down the grapes. They had dried into perfect raisins. I would eat them all winter. A few days later it began to rain. It rained every day until the middle of October. During this time one of my cats had kittens. This surprised me since both of the ship's cats were female. Soon I had so many cats that I had to kill them and chase them away from my house. Since I could not go outside, I worked on my cave. I made the cave bigger and bigger until I dug through to the other side of the hill. Here I made a little door. September 30th was the anniversary of my shipwreck. I spent the day praying to God and asking for forgiveness. Chapter 12. I Plant My Grain. After the rains, I decided it was a good time to plant my grains. I dug up a piece of land for my garden and sowed some of my seeds. Later, I was glad I did not use all of my grain. Not one grain came up in the dry months that followed. The next time, I planted my grain during the rainy season. This grain grew very well, but I only planted a little bit, and so I did not have much to harvest. In November, I made a journey to the valley. The log fence I put around my cottage had sprouted green leaves. Several years later, there were tall, beautiful trees. This gave me the idea to plant some trees around my seaside house, and so I did. I realized that on the island there were two seasons, the rainy season and the dry season. During the rainy season, I stayed inside and worked on some small projects with my hands. Chapter 13. I Travel Across the Island. I wanted to see the whole island, so I took my gun, my dog, and a lot of food and began my journey. I passed the valley where my cottage stood, and came to the seashore on the other side of the island. It was a clear day, and I could see land far in the distance. I did not know if it was another island or a continent. I knew it was part of America. It was not a Spanish colony, or I would have seen Spanish ships pass by. It must be a savage land. The savage people who live between Brazil and the Spanish countries are cannibals, and murder and eat all the people they find. This side of the island was much nicer than my side. It had flowers and grass and a lot of parrots. I caught a young parrot to take home. After a few years, I taught him to speak and say his own name, Poll. I saw rabbits and foxes and killed several. But I did not need food, so I did not eat them. The shore was covered with turtles and birds that were good to eat. I also saw penguins. I put a big pole in the ground to mark where I had been. Then I started home. On the way home, I got lost. I wandered about for a long time, but finally found my way back to the valley where my cottage was. My dog caught a young goat in the valley. I rescued it and put a little collar around the goat's neck. Finally, I went home. I was so happy to be home that I decided to never go so far away again. I fed my goat and made a cage for my parrot. It was now September 30th, and I spent the day praying to God. I had been on the island for 2 years. I thanked God for the happy life I had. I realized my life was happier now than before I came to the island. One day, when I was sad, I opened the Bible and read the words, "I will never leave you or abandon you." After that, I did not feel so lonely. I could not thank God for bringing me to the island, but I thanked him for opening my eyes to the evil of my former life. Chapter 14. I Am Never Lazy. So I began my 3rd year on the island. I spent every day reading my Bible, hunting for food, and then cooking my food. These activities took up most of the day. When I had a few hours, I worked on other projects. I worked very slowly because I did everything alone and used only crude tools and my hands. For example, I worked for 42 days making a board for a shelf. 2 skilled carpenters with the correct tools could have made 6 boards in 1 day, but I was patient and eventually finished my projects. In November, my grain started to grow. but soon after green plants appeared, goats, rabbits and other animals ate them. I built a fence around my field and tied my dog near the fence where he barked and barked all night long. So I protected my grain until it was tall with little green seeds, but then the birds found my grain and I knew that soon they would eat it all. So I shot 3 birds and hung them up the way we hang thieves in England. I hung them up in chains for all the other birds to see. My plan worked. The birds left my part of the island and never touched my grain again. Finally, I harvested my grain and got 2 baskets of rice and 2.5 baskets of barley. This made me very happy. I did not have a way of grinding my grain into flour or baking it, so I decided not to eat it, but save it all to plant next season. Then I would have a very good crop and could experiment with bread making. I'm sure very few people think about all the work it takes to make a loaf of bread. I began to plough a larger field with crude tools I made. This was slow, difficult work. Then I built a fence around my field. Finally, I planted my grain. I spent 3 months doing all this work. When it rained, I stayed inside and tried to make some clay pots. Reader, you would laugh to see the many odd and ugly things I made. I found some clay, dug it out, carried it home, and successfully finished 2 large ugly jars. This work took 2 months. Then I made many small pots and dishes and baked them in the sun, but none of these dishes held liquid. Finally, I discovered that when I put clay pots onto the fire, they became hard as stone. I made a large pot and baked it in the fire until it was hard. Then I put some water and a piece of meat in the pot and made a very good soup. Over many months, I experimented with making bread. I found or made tools to grind the grain. I made a sieve to separate the seed. I made clay dishes to bake the dough. I baked my loaves of bread in the fire and learned to make rice cakes. This is how I spent the 3rd year on the island. I often thought about the land I had seen from the other side of the island. I wanted to travel to this land. Maybe it was a continent. I could travel farther, find other people and escape, but maybe it was a dangerous land of savage men. I wish now that I had my boy Jory and a boat. I went to look at the wreck of the ship's boat. 11 sailors had rowed it to shore on the night of the shipwreck, but I could not move it alone. It was lying in the sand on shore. The boat was broken and very heavy. After trying for weeks to move the boat, I realized this was impossible. But my desire to travel to the other land grew stronger. Chapter 15. I make a canoe. I began to think about making a canoe like the kind that Africans and Indians make. I cut down a huge tree, and after many months of hard work, I built a large, beautiful canoe. But I never thought about getting the boat into the water. I tried many different ways to move the boat to shore. I even tried to dig a canal to float the boat to sea, but I could not move the boat. Now I saw how foolish I was. So I began my 4th year on the island. I spent the 4th anniversary praying to God. On the island, I was removed from the wickedness of the world. I had everything I needed. There was no lust or violence or greed. I enjoyed as much as I could use, no more. I was very comfortable. By now, all of my clothes were full of holes. I could not go naked because the sun burned my skin, so I had to make some more clothes. I saved all the skins of the animals I killed, and I made a hat and a suit of clothes made from these skins. They looked ugly and strange, but they kept the sun off my head and kept me dry in the rain. I also made a goatskin umbrella. I lived like this comfortably for 5 years. Sometimes I was lonely and wished for human conversation, but then I talked to God and felt better. Every day I worked in my grain fields, gathered fruit, and hunted with my gun. I also worked to build another canoe. Finally, I finished this canoe and moved it into the creek. The canoe was much smaller and easy to move. My first canoe was still lying in the woods. Now that I had a boat, I wanted to make a voyage around the island. I made a canvas sail for my boat and loaded it with food, my gun, and other things I would need. It was on November, in the 6th year of my captivity on the island. The voyage took more time than I expected. The island was not large, but was surrounded by dangerous rocks and strong currents. Once my little boat was pulled out to sea by a strong current. I was frightened and began to pray. I thought I would starve or die of thirst in the middle of the ocean. That afternoon, a strong wind began to blow my boat in the correct direction. Later, I found a current that took my boat back toward the island. When I got to shore, I fell down and thanked God. The next morning, I found a little cove to keep my boat while I explored the shore. After exploring a bit, I found a familiar place on the shore and found my way to my old country cottage. I lay down and fell asleep. I was awoken by a voice. "Robinson Crusoe, poor Robinson Crusoe, where have you been?" You can imagine how surprised and frightened I was. I opened my eyes to see Poll, my parrot, sitting on a tree branch. "Poor Robinson Crusoe, how did you come here? Where have you been?" he said, exactly like I'd taught him to say, so I carried him home with me. Chapter 16. I improved my handcraft skills. I was very frightened by my experience at sea. I wished that my boat was on my side of the island, but I did not know how to get it back. The current around the island was too strong, and I was very lucky to be alive. I spent a quiet year at home making clay pots and baskets. My skills improved more and more. I used the things I made to carry and store food. At this time, I began to run low on gunpowder. How would I kill any goats without my gun? I had my one tame goat, but I needed a male goat to breed her. Finally, she died of old age. It was now my 11th year on the island. After a lot of trouble, I trapped several wild goats. I built a fence around their pasture and fed the goats grain. In a year, I had 12 goats, and 2 years after that, I had 43 goats. I killed a few to eat. I also set up a dairy and learned to milk goats. After many failed attempts, I also made butter and cheese. I sat at my table and ate like a king, surrounded by my old dog, Poll the parrot, and my 2 cats. This is what I looked like. I wore a tall hat made of goat skin, with a flap to protect my neck from the sun and rain. I wore strange, lumpy clothes made of goat skin, with many tools and pouches hanging from my belt. On my back I carried a basket. On my shoulder I carried a gun, and over my head was a large goatskin umbrella. My skin was baked brown by the sun, and I trimmed my moustache into a large set of Turkish whiskers. Any Englishman would have laughed to see me. Chapter 17. I find a footprint. One day I went to the other side of the island to use my boat. On shore I found a man's naked footprint in the sand. The toes, heel, and every part of the foot were very clear. I ran back to my fort, terrified. I did not sleep all night. My mind was troubled by confused thoughts. I wondered if the devil was on my island. Finally, I decided it was a savage man who had sailed over from the other land. If they found me, the savages would eat me, destroy my fields of grain, and steal my goats. For years I had missed human company more than anything. Now I was terrified to see a man. I spent many days hiding in my fort. I prayed to God and asked him what I should do. I told myself that the footprint was my own. Then I began to feel a little better. A few days later, I gathered my courage to go down to the shore and measure the footprint against my own foot. I saw immediately that the foot was much bigger than mine. I almost fainted with fear. I went home feeling very sick and frightened. I had lived on the island for 15 years without seeing a man. I began to build another strong wall around my fort. I had taken 7 guns from the ship, and I put them at small holes in the wall. I could shoot at my enemy from behind the wall. I spent months building this wall. I also planted a thick grove of trees around my fort. In 6 years, I had a wild jungle growing around my fort. No man would think that a house stood behind it. I also built a fence around a hidden pasture in the middle of the forest for my goats. I wanted to protect them from the savages. During this time, I never saw any humans. Chapter 18. I see bones on the shore. After I built the hidden pasture for my goats, I explored the whole island. On the western shore of the island, I came over a little hill and saw the shore below me spread with human bones. I saw skulls, hands, feet, and other bones of the human body. I saw a place where someone had built a fire. I stood frozen with horror. Then I turned my face away and vomited. I walked back home in shock. With tears in my eyes, I thanked God for shipwrecking me on the other side of the island. I had lived on this island for 18 years without seeing a cannibal. I decided that I was safe if the cannibals never came to my side of the island. I was so horrified by the thought of humans killing and eating other humans that I remained thoughtful and sad. For 2 years I stayed close to home. I quit using my gun because I was afraid that the cannibals might hear it, but I never went anywhere without it. After some time passed, I began to feel better. I lived a very comfortable life and had everything I needed. But I was obsessed with thoughts of destroying the cannibals. My mind was obsessed with ideas for weapons I would make to kill the savages. I wanted to kill as many as possible. I chose a place on top of the hill to watch for the cannibals' boats. Although I went to this place every day, I never saw any boats. I thought a lot about the cannibals. Maybe they did not think it was a crime to kill and eat their prisoners, like we do not think it is a crime to kill a cow or to eat meat. When I thought about this more, I decided I was wrong to hate the cannibals. Christians often killed men in battle. The Spaniards killed millions of innocent people in America. Even in Spain, people talk about this massacre with horror. All Christians in Europe say the Spanish massacre of people in America is unnaturally cruel. I realized I was wrong to plan to massacre the savages. They killed and ate each other, but they had not hurt me. Instead, I would hide from them. They would never know I was here. Chapter 19. I rarely leave my fort. For a year, I rarely leave my fort. Once I went to the other shore to get my boat. I carried my boat across land to the eastern shore and hid it. I went to the hidden pasture every day to care for my goats. Otherwise, I did not go out. What if I had met a savage instead of a footprint? What if I had walked into a group of savages? I shivered to think about that. I stopped doing anything that might alert the cannibals. I did not make a fire. I did not hammer a nail. I did not shoot my gun. One day I was cutting some wood and I accidentally stepped into a cave. I heard a sound like a man in pain coming from the dark. I heard a sigh and a gasp for breath. I took a torch and ran into the cave, holding the fire above my head. A dying old goat was lying in there. I decided to come back with candles and explore the cave. The next day I went back to the cave and bought some candles. I had to crawl through a long, narrow tunnel which led into a large room. The candlelight illuminated a high ceiling covered with jewels, gold, diamonds and other precious stones. It was a very safe, dry room, so I decided to hide my guns and gunpowder in this cave. It was a perfect place to hide from the cannibals. The next day I buried the old goat. I had lived on the island for 23 years, and I would have been happy to live here until I lay down and died like the old goat. Paul, my parrot, spoke to me like a companion and lived with me for 22 years. He may still be alive. My dog lived with me for 16 years and then died of old age. I kept several cats and tame goats around my house. I had 2 or 3 other parrots, but they did not talk as well as Paul. I had several tame seabirds. This was my family. During my 23rd year, I was in the fields harvesting my grain when I saw a fire about 2 miles away. I was very surprised. I went home and loaded all my guns. I waited and waited, but nothing happened, so I crawled to the top of my hill and looked through my spyglass. I saw 9 savages sitting near a fire. I decided the fire was for cooking and eating their victims. I watched them dance and saw they were naked. When I saw them get into their canoes and leave, I took my guns and went to the place where they built the fire. I saw many savages in boats rowing toward the mainland. I saw the blood and bones of half-eaten humans on shore. I felt sick. After that I lived very cautiously. I was careful to be silent and leave no signs of myself, but I did not see the cannibals again for another 15 months. Chapter 20. I see the wreck of a ship. On the 16th of May, a big storm blew in. I was reading my Bible when I heard a noise like a gun. I jumped up and ran outside. As I ran to the top of the hill, I saw a flash of fire out at sea and heard the gun again. It must be a ship in distress, and the sailors are firing their guns for help, I thought. I knew I could not help them, but I built a big fire on shore. I think they saw my fire because they fired their guns again. In the morning, I thought I saw a ship far out at sea. I ran to get a better look, and saw that it was a ship wrecked on some rocks. I wondered what had happened to the men on the ship. Had they all drowned in the sea? I felt a deep sadness. For the first time since I came to the island, I felt the strongest need for a human friend. I wish one man had survived, I cried, and squeezed my hands together. But I never knew what happened to those men. A few days later, I found the body of a boy on shore. I decided to take my boat out to the ship, but when I rowed my boat a short distance from the shore, I saw the strong current in front of me. The currents could carry me out to sea and I would die. I was frightened and went back to the island. I climbed to the top of a hill and studied the currents. I decided to try to row out to the shipwreck the next morning. The next morning I braved the current and rowed out to the ship. It was a Spanish ship and very damaged. A dog on the ship saw me, jumped into the sea and swam to my boat. I gave him some food and water. I went on the ship, and the first things I saw were 2 dead men. I took 2 chests, some liquor, and a few other useful things. Then I rowed back to shore. Inside the 2 chests I found some delicious food and drinks, clothes, and a lot of money. The money was useless to me, but I put it in my cave. Chapter 21. I hear a man's voice. For 2 years my head was full of plans to escape the island. I thought again and again of my foolishness when I decided to leave Brazil to steal slaves. I would be a rich man if I had stayed in Brazil. One night, during my 24th year on the island, I lay in bed. I could not sleep. I thought about many things, but mostly I thought about the cannibals. I thanked God for keeping me safe for 24 years, and I longed for someone to talk with. I thought about making a voyage to the land of the cannibals. When I slept, I dreamed that the cannibals returned to the island. I dreamed they brought a slave with them that they planned to eat, but the savage escaped. He ran away across the island. I rescued him and took him into my house and made him my servant. Now he would help me sail a boat to the mainland. When I awoke, I thought about my dream. I decided to try to capture a savage. Every day I went to the west side of the island to look for their canoes, but I did not see anything for more than a year. Then, one morning, I went outside and saw 5 canoes on the shore of my side of the island. I climbed the hill and saw 30 savages dancing around a fire. They dragged 2 people from the canoes, killed one, and began to cut him up. They left the other man standing alone. Suddenly, this man started to run. 3 cannibals chased him, but he ran very fast. He came to the little river, jumped in, and swam across. 2 of the cannibals followed him across the river, but one cannibal could not swim and went back to the fire. This was the time to get my servant. I took 2 guns and ran down the hill. I shouted to the first savage, but I'm sure he was very frightened of me. I ran up behind one cannibal and knocked him down with my gun. I did not want to kill anyone, but the other cannibal took a bow and arrow and aimed at me. I shot him with my gun and killed him. I shouted at the savage to come to me. He slowly came back and knelt on the ground in front of me. He took my foot and put it on his head. This must be his way of saying he would be my slave forever. The cannibal on the ground began to wake up. The savage spoke some words to me. I did not understand them, but they were the first words I had heard for 25 years. My savage took my sword, ran at the cannibal, and cut off his head. He brought the head to me and laid it on the ground at my feet. Then he buried both of the bodies in the sand. Then I signalled to him to follow me, and I took him to the cave. I gave him bread and water and pointed at my blanket. So the poor savage lay down and went to sleep. Chapter 22. I call him Friday. He was a handsome man, tall, strong, and young. He was very manly, but his face was sweet and soft like a European's. His hair was long and black, and his eyes were bright. His skin was dark, but not the tone of Native American skin. His nose was small, not flat like in Africa. He had a very good mouth with straight white teeth. When he woke up, he came outside. I was milking my goats. He ran to me and lay down on the ground near my feet. He put one of my feet on his head. He made signs to show me that he would be my servant for the rest of his life. I understood his signs and told him I was happy with him. I began to teach him to speak to me. I told him his name was Friday, because Friday was the day I saved him. I taught him to call me master. I taught him yes and no. The next day I gave him some clothes because he was completely naked. We went to the place where the 2 cannibals were buried. Friday said we should dig up the bodies and eat them. I showed him that I was very angry at this idea. I went to the top of the hill and he followed me meekly. The cannibals were gone. I took my man Friday with me and went down the hill to the place where the cannibals had their fire. It was a horrible sight. Blood, bones, and bits of half-eaten human flesh lay scattered on the sand. I made Friday gather up the bodies and I burned them. Friday wanted to eat some of the meat. I told him I would kill him if he ate any human flesh. He was still a cannibal at heart. I made a suit of clothes for my man Friday and built a little tent for him. I made a strong door to my bedroom so Friday could not attack me at night. But he was a very loving servant. He loved me the way a child loves his father. He told me many times that he would die for me, and I believed him. I taught him how to make and do many things. I showed him how I shot animals with my gun. He was amazed. I laughed at his amazement. I made a soup of goat meat and fed some to Friday. He thought the soup was strange, but very good. The next day I fed him some roasted goat meat, and Friday promised that he would never eat human flesh again. The next day I taught Friday how to grind corn and make bread. Soon he could do all the work for me. Friday told me he would work harder for me if I would tell him what to do. Chapter 23. We make another canoe. This was the best year I spent on the island. I taught Friday to speak English, and I enjoyed talking to him. I began to love him, and I know he loved me more than anything in the world. I asked him how he became a prisoner. He explained that he was captured in battle by another tribe of cannibals. They took their prisoners to the island to eat them. Friday said he and members of his tribe had been to the island many times to eat prisoners. One time, he and his tribe had eaten 22 men, 2 women, and a child. I asked Friday many questions about the land and other islands in the area. I learned that my island was at the mouth of a huge river that flowed through the large island of Trinidad. I learned that Friday's people were called Caribs, so I was in a part of America called the Caribbean. Friday said in the West were other white men like me who had killed many men. I thought he must be talking about the Spaniards, who were famous for their cruelty in America. I asked him if it was possible to leave this island and travel to these white men. Friday said it would be possible, but we must build a big boat. I began to talk to Friday about religion. I taught him about God and heaven. Friday told me about his religion. He said old men in his tribe went to the top of the mountain to pray to old Benamuki. He said Benamuki was very old and he made everything in the world. I thought about how the most blinded, ignorant pagans have some form of religion. I explained to Friday that his religion was a lie and that old Benamuki was the devil. Then I taught Friday about the devil and his evil tricks. It was not easy to make Friday understand about the devil. He asked so many innocent questions that I could not answer. "You say your God is so strong," said Friday. "Is he stronger than the devil?" "Yes, Friday, God is stronger than the devil," I said. "Then why does God not kill the devil?" he asked. I was very surprised by the question and did not know what to say. I sent Friday away. Then I prayed to God to help me save the soul of this savage. I hoped that some day Friday would come to know Jesus Christ and become a Christian. I spent 3 happy years with Friday on the island. At the end of 3 years, he was a better Christian than I. We read the Bible together. I taught him how to shoot a gun and gave him a knife. I told him about Europe and the shipwreck that brought me here. When I showed him the wrecked boat, he was quiet. Then he said that 4 years ago, a boat like this with 17 white men had come to the shore of his country. "What happened to these white men?" I asked. Friday said that the white men still lived there, and the savages gave them food. He said the cannibals only ate men who came to fight. One clear day we stood on the hill looking at the mainland of America. "Oh joy," said Friday, "that is my country." He looked so happy that I was jealous. I thought that if Friday went back to his country, he would forget about me. One day I asked, "Friday, what would you do if you went back to your country? Would you be wild and eat the flesh of men again?" "No, no, I would tell the others to pray to God, to eat cornbread and milk, to not eat man," he said. "They will listen and they will learn." "Well, Friday, you will go back to your country," I said. Friday was very sad. He said he would not leave the island without Master. He urged me to go with him and teach the savages about God. "No, Friday, I will stay here. You will go without me," I said. Then Friday said I must kill him, because he would not leave me any other way. He began to cry. Then I saw how much he loved me. I told him I would never send him away from me again. We cut down a tree and began working on our canoe. In 1 month the canoe was finished. It was a large, beautiful canoe. My man Friday steered it quickly through the water. "Friday, do you think she will carry us over?" "Yes, she will carry us very well," Friday said. It was my 27th year on the island. I made my man Friday make a dock for the canoe. Then we waited until the month of November, when we would make our voyage. Chapter 24. We Fight the Cannibals. One day I sent Friday to get a turtle for our dinner. Soon he came running back. "Oh, master, there are 1, 2, 3 canoes on the beach." "Well, Friday," I said, "do not be frightened. Can you fight?" "I can shoot," he said, "but there are many." He was very frightened. I gave him a drink of rum, 2 guns, and his axe. I took 6 guns and loaded them with bullets. Then I went to the top of the hill. I saw 21 cannibals and 3 prisoners near a fire. I was very angry and wanted to kill them all. Then I remembered that the cannibals were innocent savages. They had not hurt me. Their savage traditions were God's business, not mine. I sent Friday to hide behind a tree near the cannibals and watch them. He came back and said the cannibals were eating a prisoner. Another prisoner lay on the ground, and the cannibals planned to kill and eat him too. Friday said this prisoner was a white man. I was filled with horror. I looked through my spyglass and saw a naked European lying on the ground. I took my guns and moved closer to the cannibals. I hid behind some bushes. 2 cannibals walked over to kill the Christian lying on the ground. I aimed my gun at them. "Friday, are you ready?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "Then fire at them," I said. Friday killed 2 and wounded 3. I killed 2 and wounded 1. The savages screamed in surprise and fear. We fired our guns again and wounded many more. The savages ran around screaming like mad things. Many were bloody and hurt. "Friday, follow me," I said. I jumped up and ran out of the woods yelling. I ran toward the white prisoner lying on the beach. The cannibals ran toward their canoes. I shouted to Friday to shoot them. Friday fired his gun and many cannibals fell. I cut the ropes tying the prisoner. He told me he was a Christian from Spain. He tried to thank me for saving his life. "We must fight now," I said. "Take this gun and this sword." The Spaniard took the gun and the sword and killed 2 cannibals quickly. He was weak, but we fought fiercely and killed many savages. Friday fought the cannibals with only his hatchet and killed many savages. Finally, most of the cannibals were dead. Only a few cannibals escaped in their canoe. I climbed into a canoe to chase them, but I found another prisoner in the canoe. When Friday saw the prisoner, he laughed and cried and sang. The prisoner was Friday's father. We took the two men home and gave them food and water. Now my island kingdom had people, and I was lord of them all. Chapter 25. We plan a voyage to the colonies of America. I killed a goat to feed my new subjects. Then I began a conversation with them. Friday was my interpreter. I asked Friday's father if the cannibals would return to the island. He said the cannibals were very frightened by the fire and noise of the gun. They thought Friday and I were demons. The cannibals would not return to this magical, haunted island. The Spaniard said he and 16 other men were shipwrecked. They had been living in the land of the savages. They did not have any weapons or any tools to build another ship. The Spaniard told me that the men were very miserable. If I rescued them, they would owe me their lives, so I decided to rescue them. First, we planted a large field with corn and barley. We would need the extra food for our journey. I ordered Friday and his father to cut down some trees and make some boards to build our boat. We spent 6 months gathering food and preparing for our journey. Then I sent the Spaniard and the father of Friday to voyage to the land of the cannibals to fetch the 16 Spaniards. I told the Spaniard that all of the men must swear to follow my orders and be under my command. The Spaniard and the old savage sailed away in October. I had been on the island for 27 years. Chapter 26. We suppress a mutiny. I waited 8 days. One morning Friday ran into my house. "Master, they are here." I jumped up and ran outside. I saw a large English ship anchored out at sea and an English longboat sailing near the island. "These are not the people we were waiting for," I told Friday, and told him to hide. I was very confused. Why was this English ship here? I had a secret feeling of danger. 8 Englishmen pulled the boat up on the shore. Then they took 3 prisoners out of the boat. "You see," said Friday, "Englishmen eat men too." "They are not going to eat them," I said, but I trembled with horror. The prisoners begged their captors for mercy. Some of the Englishmen began to explore the island. I was glad my castle was hidden. I began to prepare to fight. I took out my guns and gave 3 guns to Friday. A few hours later, when the sun was very hot, the 8 men went into the woods and fell asleep. I decided to go talk to the prisoners. I walked up to them, dressed in my goatskin hat and coat. "Who are you, gentlemen?" I asked. The prisoners were very surprised and did not answer. "Do not be surprised," I said. "Maybe you have a friend here." "Are you an angel sent from heaven?" one of the men asked. "An angel would be better dressed," I said. "I'm an Englishman. Tell me what happened to you. Maybe I can help you." "I am the captain of the ship," said one of the men. "My men have mutinied against me." He told me that if I rescued him, he and his ship would be at my command, so I gave them some guns. "I do not like to kill them," the captain said, "but 2 of the men are very evil." The men woke up and began walking to the beach. The prisoners fired their guns and the captors yelled in surprise. One man fell to the ground, dead. Another man was hurt. The other men begged the captain not to kill them. They promised the captain they would be loyal to him, so the captain did not kill them, but tied their hands and feet. Then I told the captain my story and showed him my castle and all the things I made. The captain was amazed. "Some day I will show you my country home," I said, "but now we must take back your ship." 26 men were on the ship, and all had mutinied against the captain. I did not think we could fight so many. We took the supplies out of the longboat and put a hole in the bottom so it could not sail. Soon the ship fired a signal. They fired and fired, but the longboat did not return. Through my spyglass I saw 10 men put another longboat into the water and begin rowing toward the island. These men had guns. We moved our prisoners to the cave and promised to untie them in a day or 2. 2 of the men were honest men, said the captain, and so we had tied them and gave them guns. Now there were 7 men against 10. The men in the longboat pulled their boat up on shore. They were very surprised to find the empty, damaged boat. They called and called but got no answer. They went back to the ship with their news. A larger group of men with many guns rowed to shore. They marched around the island calling, "Hullo! Hullo!" I ordered Friday and the captain's mate to go into the forest and answer their call. Friday would lead them through the woods calling and calling, but never showing himself until the men were lost in the woods. The men heard a "Hullo!" coming from the woods. A large group of men ran towards the sound, while a few men stayed on shore. When most of the men were out of sight, we ran out and attacked the men on shore, and they quickly surrendered. Soon Friday and the captain's mate returned. The men were lost in the woods and very confused and frightened. They did not return to the beach until after dark. They were very surprised that the men on shore were gone, and the boat was stuck in the sand. They made a fire and told each other that demons lived on this island. We moved very quietly toward the men around the fire. Soon the main villain walked near us. This was the man who led the mutiny. The captain jumped out and killed the villain immediately. Then we all fired our guns. The men were very confused and frightened. They did not know how many of us hid in the dark. I told one of our men to call out to the men. "Tom Smith," he called. "Tom Smith, surrender, or you are all dead men." "Is that you, Atkins?" "Yes, here is our captain and 50 men. If you do not surrender, you will all die." The men all decided to surrender. The captain told the men that they were now property of the king of the island, but I remained hidden. Chapter 27. We take the ship. We locked up all of our prisoners and had a little conversation with them. The captain threatened to take them back to England, where they would be hanged if they did not help him take back the ship. The men all agreed to help the captain. The captain and a few men rowed back to the ship at midnight. I stayed on the island to watch over the prisoners. I told the prisoners I was a servant of the king of the island. The captain and his men easily got on board the ship. They wounded several men, but did not kill anyone. Then the captain's mate ran into the cabin and shot the new rebel captain through the mouth. He died immediately, and the mutiny ended. The next morning the captain called to me. When I went to the top of the hill, he hugged me, then pointed at the ship. "My dear friend, that is your ship, and we are all your servants." I could not speak. I sat down on the ground and cried. Then I hugged the captain and told him he was sent from heaven to rescue me. The captain brought me many bottles of wine, tobacco, delicious food, and a beautiful suit of clothes. I felt very strange when I put on the new clothes. The captain was worried about the prisoners. He thought 2 of the prisoners were very evil men. I told Friday to bring the men to me. I told them I was the king of the island. I told them I had decided to go to England with the captain and gave them a choice. They could stay here on the island, or we would take them to England to be hanged. The men decided to stay on the island. I showed them my fields, goats, houses, and everything I'd built on the island. I told them how to live very comfortably. I told them that 16 Spaniards were coming soon, and made them promise to treat them well. When I left the island, I took my goatskin hat, a parrot, and all the money I had hidden in the cave, and so I left the island on the 19th of December in 1686. I had been on the island 28 years, 2 months and 19 days. After a long voyage, I arrived in England on June the 11th in 1687. I had been gone for 35 years. My mother and father were dead, and almost my entire family was gone. I decided to go to Lisbon and discover what happened to my plantation in Brazil. My man Friday travelled with me. Chapter 28. I Find My Wealth. In Lisbon I found my friend the sea captain, who rescued me from the shores of Africa. He told me that my plantation was doing very well. He said my partner was a very honest man. The sea captain said I could go back to Brazil and claim my half of the plantation. The sea captain gave me some money, which he said he owed me. He said he had been shipwrecked off the coast of Lisbon and lost some of my supplies. My eyes filled with tears at this show of honesty, and I only took some of the money. I wrote to my partner and soon received a letter from him. He was very glad I was alive, and he wrote that my plantation was very successful. There were many slaves to harvest the sugar cane, and the plantation made a lot of money. He said I was a very rich man. I had £5,000 and owned a plantation that made more than £1,000 a year. First, I gave a large reward to my friend the sea captain, who was kind to me in the beginning and honest with me in the end. Then I sent some money to the old widow of the captain, who had been my friend on my first voyage to Africa. Then I made plans to sail to England with all my wealth. But I was afraid to travel by sea. I knew sea travel was unlucky for me, so I joined a party of gentlemen and we travelled to England by land. Chapter 29. We travel over the mountains. We travelled through Spain and began to climb the Pyrenees mountains. The weather was bitter cold and heavy snow lay on the ground. We hired a guide to take us through the mountains. One night 2 wolves and a large bear attacked our guide. The man would have been killed and eaten, but Friday ran close and shot a wolf in the head. Friday was familiar with wolves and bears from his country. "Look at me, I will make you laugh," said Friday, and he began to tease and wrestle with the bear. We did laugh very much. Friday made the bear dance and dance. Finally he shot him in the head, and we continued on our journey. It was a long, difficult journey through dangerous mountains filled with wolves and other wild animals. Wolves attacked us many times. We saw half-eaten bodies of men surrounded by wolves. Our guide became sick, and we had to leave him and take another guide. Finally, we arrived in Toulouse. Everyone told us we were lucky to escape the wolves. I decided that I would never travel through the mountains again. Chapter 30. I Return to my island. We travelled from France to England. In England I found my friend the widow. I decided to leave my money with her. She was an honest woman, and she would take care of my money for me. I began to think about travelling to my plantation in Brazil, but I was afraid to travel to Brazil, which is a Roman Catholic country. I was not a Catholic and did not want to die in the Inquisition, so I decided to sell my plantation. I sold my plantation for a large amount of money and lived very comfortably in England for 7 years. I married and had 3 children. After my wife died, I began to think about my island. In 1694, I returned to my island. I found the Spaniards had colonized the island. The Spaniards had captured 5 women from the mainland, and there were about 20 young children on the island. I promised to send them some more women. When I got to Brazil, I sent 7 women and several cows and sheep to the Spaniards. Later, the island was invaded by 300 savages, but the Spaniards fought fiercely and many savages were killed in a huge storm. The Spaniards still live on the island, and I had many other amazing adventures. Maybe I will write them down in another book later.